He highly arrogantly, cruelly divorced his highly devoted wife entirely because she absolutely could not miraculously give him a highly coveted heir, highly toxically, explicitly telling her directly to her pale face that she was absolutely useless and completely defective. He highly maliciously replaced her completely with a significantly younger, highly glamorous elite executive. But exactly when she confidently appears perfectly at the highly elite law firm, entirely to highly officially sign the highly brutal divorce papers, she completely drops her highly expensive emerald coat, flawlessly revealing that she is heavily pregnant. And exactly when his handsome face completely, violently pales, and he highly frantically asks exactly who the true biological father officially is, she delivers the absolute, ultimate lethal blow that completely, violently shatters his highly arrogant, fake world completely into a highly pathetic million pieces. Welcome back, my beautiful family, to real stories that change lives. If you fiercely believe that absolute karma always successfully collects its highly massive debts, and you absolutely love highly explosive stories of ultimate revenge and pure resilience, you absolutely must hear this incredible story. Please smash that like button to strongly support our content, subscribe to our channel, and let me know exactly what you would do if your ex begged you to come back after calling you defective in the comments below. Let's get directly into The Secret in the Boardroom. Part 1. The Impossible Secret. What exactly would you highly actively do, exactly if the highly anticipated day that you finally, completely free, completely yourself, completely from the highly toxic man who highly maliciously called you completely defective, is absolutely also the highly exact same day that you highly proudly reveal completely to him the highly massive miracle that he highly arrogantly believed you were completely, utterly incapable entirely of miraculously creating? The highly polished glass doors entirely of Guzman and Associates brilliantly gleamed completely under the highly bright afternoon sun, entirely in massive Madrid, exactly as Elena confidently crossed them. Her fragile heart violently beating completely with a highly complex mixture entirely of highly nervous anxiety and highly unshakable, absolute determination. At exactly 32 beautiful years old, she had highly agonizingly learned that highly true courage absolutely was not the highly complete absence entirely of blinding fear, but the highly absolute decision entirely to confidently move completely forward, entirely, despite it. Today was officially the highly anticipated day, exactly when she would completely, permanently, close the absolute most highly painful toxic chapter entirely of her entire massive life. Today, she would highly officially sign the highly brutal divorce papers entirely from Fernando Velasco. The highly exclusive waiting room aggressively smelled entirely of highly expensive Italian leather and highly premium freshly brewed coffee. Elena highly politely announced completely herself directly to the highly elite receptionist. A highly young woman, completely with highly perfectly styled hair, who literally barely actively raised her piercing gaze completely from her bright screen. While she highly patiently waited, Elena highly meticulously adjusted the highly expensive, beautiful emerald green designer coat that she flawlessly wore. Highly carefully, meticulously arranged entirely to flawlessly hide the highly massive truth that she highly secretly carried completely underneath it. Exactly 7 agonizing months, highly lovingly cultivating a highly massive miracle that absolutely everyone, flawlessly including her highly toxic, soon-to-be ex-husband, had highly arrogantly considered completely, medically impossible. The expensive phone entirely of the elite receptionist violently vibrated. She slowly looked completely completely with a highly practiced, fake corporate smile, and highly politely pointed directly down the highly long, polished hallway. Highly exclusive conference room 3. Absolute second heavy door, completely to the absolute right. Mr. Velasco has absolutely already confidently arrived. Part 2. The confrontation. Elena confidently walked completely down the highly polished corridor. Absolutely every single, highly deliberate step, physically feeling significantly heavier than the absolute previous one. The highly imposing walls were heavily decorated completely with highly framed elite degrees and highly prestigious certificates entirely of massive achievements. Highly freezing, cold reminders entirely of the highly ruthless, elite corporate world entirely in which Fernando highly proudly inhabited. A highly toxic world entirely of highly massive deals and highly hostile acquisitions, exactly where highly normal people were absolutely just highly pathetic commodities, and highly pure emotions were highly pathetic weaknesses entirely to be highly ruthlessly exploited. She completely stopped perfectly before the heavy door entirely of the massive conference room, took a massive, incredibly deep breath, and smoothly opened it. Fernando was peacefully sitting entirely at the absolute head entirely of the highly massive mahogany table, heavily flanked completely by exactly 2 highly terrifying elite lawyers, entirely in incredibly expensive bespoke suits. At exactly 38 highly arrogant years old, he absolutely still safely remained highly shockingly, devastatingly attractive. In exactly that highly specific way that massive money can highly successfully preserve and highly aggressively enhance. His highly dark hair, perfectly, impeccably styled. His sharp jaw, incredibly sharp. His piercing gray eyes, incredibly calculating. He flawlessly wore a highly expensive charcoal bespoke suit that highly likely easily cost significantly more than exactly what the absolute vast majority, entirely of highly normal people, highly successfully earned, entirely in an entire agonizing month. When he vividly saw Elena confidently enter, absolutely something violently flickered completely on his handsome face. Massive surprise, perhaps, or highly toxic disappointment entirely, that she visually looked so incredibly, highly serene. He had highly arrogantly expected entirely to vividly see her completely, violently, broken, highly pathetically diminished completely by their highly brutal separation. Instead, Elena confidently entered completely with her delicate chin incredibly high, her piercing brown eyes incredibly clear and highly, fiercely focused. She flawlessly wore highly minimal makeup, beautifully letting her highly natural beauty completely shine, completely through. Her highly beautiful chestnut hair beautifully fell entirely in highly soft waves, perfectly over her fragile shoulders. She visually looked significantly healthier than entirely in the highly agonizing final months entirely of their highly toxic marriage. Exactly when his highly constant toxic criticism had completely, violently eroded her absolute self-esteem completely to absolute nothing. Elena, he stated completely with exactly that highly familiar toxic mixture entirely of absolute authority and highly fake charm that had exactly once actively made her violently tremble. Thank you so incredibly much entirely for confidently coming. Let's highly efficiently make exactly this, exactly as incredibly painless, exactly as highly possibly possible. She highly calmly took a highly comfortable seat directly opposite, entirely from him. Her highly terrifying elite lawyer, Patricia Moreno, highly professionally installed, completely herself, perfectly at her soft side, completely with a highly reassuring, firm nod. Patricia was an incredibly fierce, absolute defender, a highly terrifying woman, entirely in her highly early 50s, who had highly successfully built her highly pristine reputation, highly aggressively, defending beautiful women, entirely in incredibly difficult, highly brutal divorces. She had vividly seen Elena entirely at her absolute worst, highly pathetic moment, and had highly bravely helped her miraculously return, completely, to highly solid ground. The highly tense meeting aggressively began completely with the highly usual, boring legal formalities, highly massive assets, highly expensive properties, highly lucrative bank accounts. Fernando had absolutely been highly, surprisingly, incredibly generous entirely in the highly massive settlement, perhaps entirely out of highly toxic guilt, perhaps highly, simply, entirely, to highly aggressively accelerate the highly tedious process, entirely, so exactly that he could highly, rapidly, happily marry Carla. The exactly 26-year-old, highly glamorous marketing executive who had highly maliciously replaced Elena entirely in his massive bed and entirely in his highly toxic life. The highly complex discussions, highly agonizingly dragged completely on. The highly sterile legal jargon flawlessly filling the heavy air, exactly like highly boring white noise. Elena safely remained completely, utterly silent. Her soft hands highly neatly folded perfectly on the massive table. She had absolutely already, highly meticulously reviewed absolutely everything completely with Patricia, agonizing weeks completely ago. She absolutely did not fiercely want absolutely anything highly massive beyond exactly what was completely 100% fair. The highly massive luxury penthouse could highly happily, peacefully stay completely with Fernando. The highly expensive vacation mansion entirely in massive Marbella could be highly rapidly sold. She absolutely only highly desperately needed, exactly just highly enough, entirely to highly bravely start completely anew, to highly successfully build a highly beautiful life completely under her absolute own highly strict terms. As Patricia highly smoothly slid the highly official final documents completely across the massive table, Fernando heavily leaned completely back entirely in his expensive chair, highly attentively studying Elena completely with a highly terrifying intensity that actively made her pale skin violently crawl. "You visually look incredibly different," he highly suddenly stated, violently interrupting his highly expensive elite lawyer entirely mid-sentence. "Are you highly actively seeing absolutely someone?" The highly intrusive, toxic question violently floated completely in the heavy air, heavily loaded completely with highly toxic implications. Elena flawlessly maintained her piercing gaze completely, unshakably firm. "Exactly that is absolutely no longer absolutely any entirely of your highly toxic business, Fernando." His sharp jaw violently tensed, but he explicitly said absolutely nothing significantly more. Patricia highly smoothly pulled the highly official papers significantly closer. "Absolutely everything that highly legally remains is officially your highly official signature, Elena. Then exactly this will absolutely be completely, permanently finalized. Elena confidently took the heavy pen, but exactly as she smoothly leaned, incredibly slightly, completely forward, the highly expensive emerald coat smoothly moved. The highly thick fabric, which had absolutely been highly carefully, meticulously arranged, smoothly opened incredibly slightly. For exactly one highly massive moment, the highly beautiful curve entirely of her massive belly was completely, undeniably visible, completely unmistakable, completely undeniable. The piercing eyes entirely of Fernando completely, violently opened completely wide. The expensive pen that he had absolutely been highly arrogantly holding completely, violently dropped directly onto the massive table. His highly expensive elite lawyers highly nervously exchanged highly confused glances, completely unsure entirely of exactly what had highly suddenly caused the highly explosive, sudden reaction entirely of their highly arrogant client. Patricia, who profoundly knew the absolute truth, simply highly quietly observed completely with highly quiet, absolute satisfaction. "What?" Fernando whispered incredibly softly, completely with a highly choked, breathless voice. "What exactly is exactly that?" Elena confidently straightened completely up, entirely in her comfortable chair, highly generously letting the highly expensive coat completely fall, completely open, absolutely entirely. Exactly now, perfectly, there was absolutely zero, highly pathetic point, entirely, in highly actively hiding it. Her soft hand smoothly moved highly protectively directly toward her massive abdomen, directly toward the highly innocent life, beautifully growing completely inside her. The exact beautiful life that Fernando had highly maliciously, explicitly told her she was completely, medically incapable, entirely, of miraculously creating. "I am officially pregnant," she stated incredibly simply, completely with a highly firm, beautiful voice. Exactly 7 agonizing months. Absolutely all the color completely, violently disappeared entirely from the handsome face, entirely of Fernando. He confidently stood completely up, highly abruptly. His heavy chair highly loudly scraping violently, completely against the hard floor. "Exactly that is completely, medically impossible. You absolutely could not. We highly desperately tried entirely for agonizing years." The elite doctor explicitly said that perfectly there was a highly incredibly small, microscopic possibility. Elena violently interrupted. "They absolutely never, ever explicitly said completely impossible. You were officially the exact, highly arrogant one who highly toxically decided that I was completely, violently broken. You were officially the exact, highly toxic one who highly maliciously called me completely defective." The highly heavy words violently hit him exactly like highly brutal physical punches. Elena intensely watched exactly as the highly toxic memories violently replayed, completely on his handsome features. The highly violent fights, the highly brutal accusations, the highly terrifying night exactly when he had finally, highly cruelly, explicitly, said the highly toxic words that completely, violently shattered their beautiful marriage completely, without absolutely any highly possible hope entirely of repair. The highly toxic January dinner. The highly painful flashback violently came completely uncalled, incredibly vivid, and highly agonizing. It had absolutely been a highly freezing, cold January evening. The freezing snow beautifully fell perfectly outside the highly massive windows, entirely of their luxury penthouse. Fernando had literally just confidently returned completely from an elite dinner, completely with highly demanding investors. his highly toxic mood absolutely already incredibly sour. Entirely due. Completely to absolutely some highly massive corporate deal that had highly catastrophically gone completely wrong. Elena was peacefully entirely in the massive living room, highly desperately researching absolutely another highly elite fertility specialist. Highly desperately, actively wanting to highly miraculously give him exactly what he most highly fiercely desired. He confidently entered, smoothly poured himself a highly expensive drink, and intensely looked directly at her completely, with a highly toxic, freezing contempt so incredibly cold that it completely froze her hot blood. I am completely, utterly exhausted entirely of exactly this, Elena. Exhausted entirely of exactly what? The highly exhausting appointments, the highly painful treatments, the highly constant disappointment? You are completely, utterly useless, completely to me. What exact specific kind entirely of highly pathetic wife absolutely cannot highly miraculously give a biological child completely to her highly successful husband? She had highly desperately attempted to slowly approach him, to highly logically explain that they could highly bravely continue actively trying. That exactly there were highly completely other viable options. But he had violently pulled completely away, his handsome face violently contorted completely by absolute disgust. I fiercely deserve absolutely something significantly better than exactly this. Significantly better than you. Carla would absolutely never, ever highly maliciously subject me completely to exactly this highly pathetic hell. Exactly that was officially the highly terrifying night that Elena profoundly realized that her beautiful marriage was completely, permanently over. Absolutely not entirely because completely of the highly painful fertility problems, but entirely because the exact man she fiercely loved had absolutely never, ever, truly, genuinely loved her. She had absolutely been a highly pathetic accessory, a highly pathetic placeholder, absolutely someone entirely to highly pathetically fill a highly boring role completely until absolutely someone significantly better confidently arrived. Fernando just found out Elena is pregnant after dumping her for being defective. How satisfying is this moment? Tell us below. Part 3. The ultimatum. Now, peacefully sitting entirely in exactly that highly sterile conference room. Fernando intensely stared directly at her massive, pregnant belly, exactly as if vividly seeing a highly terrifying ghost. Whose exactly is it? He violently demanded, his deep voice highly aggressively rising. Who exactly is the true father? Elena profoundly felt a highly massive wave entirely of highly burning, righteous, pure anger. Yours, Fernando. The innocent child is officially yours. The massive room completely, violently, fell entirely into a highly deafening silence. Absolutely even the highly expensive elite lawyers actively seemed to highly violently hold their heavy breath. The handsome face entirely of Fernando violently passed completely through highly numerous massive emotions. Blinding shock, absolute incredulity, pure hope, and massive despair. He highly clumsily stumbled completely back directly into his expensive chair, frantically grabbing completely onto the hard edge entirely of the massive table. But exactly how? Exactly when? We were absolutely still highly legally married. Exactly when? Exactly this highly miraculously happened, Elena stated incredibly calmly. Highly aggressively do the highly complex math. Exactly this innocent child was highly miraculously conceived completely, before you highly arrogantly moved completely out. Completely before you highly aggressively began entirely to highly proudly parade Carla completely around the massive city, exactly like your highly pathetic trophy. Fernando violently ran his massive hands completely through his dark hair, completely, violently destroying his highly perfect, expensive hairstyle. A biological son. My biological son. He intensely looked directly at Elena. Exactly. This completely, violently changes absolutely everything. We absolutely cannot highly legally divorce. Exactly now, we highly desperately need to actively try completely again, entirely for the innocent baby. Patricia highly gently placed a highly protective hand perfectly on the fragile arm entirely of Elena. But Elena incredibly slowly shook her beautiful head. She had profoundly known that exactly this highly explosive moment would highly inevitably arrive. She had highly meticulously prepared completely for exactly it. No, Fernando, exactly this highly miraculously changes absolutely nothing. You highly aggressively wanted a highly brutal divorce entirely because I absolutely could not highly miraculously give you a biological child. Well, I am highly miraculously giving you exactly one, but I am absolutely not highly generously giving you me. Absolutely no longer. You absolutely cannot highly maliciously take my biological son completely away, completely from me. Fernando stated completely with exactly that highly dangerous, toxic tone that she intimately remembered way too incredibly well. I am absolutely not highly maliciously taking absolutely anything completely away, completely from you. Elena highly sharply retorted. You will highly legally possess highly official visitation rights, highly strict support agreements, absolutely everything highly legal and completely appropriate. But I will absolutely not be your highly pathetic wife. You completely, violently destroyed exactly that highly beautiful possibility, the highly terrifying night you highly toxically called me completely useless. Fernando frantically looked directly at his highly expensive elite lawyers, completely with absolute desperation. Exactly as if they could highly magically fix exactly this. Miraculously make Elena highly pathetically come directly to her highly pathetic senses. But they safely remained completely, utterly silent. Profoundly understanding that exactly this highly confidently went completely, infinitely beyond their highly strict jurisdiction. Exactly this was entirely about violently broken hearts. Absolutely not highly complex contracts. Please, Fernando stated. And Elena had absolutely never, ever clearly heard him highly pathetically beg completely before. I highly catastrophically committed a highly massive mistake. I was incredibly cruel. I was completely wrong. But we can highly miraculously fix exactly this. Deeply think entirely about exactly what is the absolute best entirely for the innocent child. A highly innocent child highly desperately needs absolutely both loving parents. Exactly. This innocent child will highly successfully possess absolutely both loving parents, Elena stated incredibly firmly. But exactly those highly complex parents will absolutely not be highly legally married. I highly agonizingly spent exactly 7 agonizing months highly bravely learning exactly how to successfully live completely without you, Fernando. Exactly 7 agonizing months, highly beautifully discovering exactly who I truly am. Exactly when I am absolutely not highly desperately attempting entirely to absolutely be exactly what you highly toxically wanted me entirely to absolutely be so. And I highly fiercely like exactly this highly beautiful version entirely of completely myself. I am significantly stronger. I am significantly happier. I am completely free. She confidently took the heavy pen, and completely with a highly firm, completely unshakable, soft hand, she highly proudly signed her beautiful name completely on the highly brutal divorce papers. The highly expensive ink actively seemed to brilliantly shine completely under the highly soft afternoon light, beautifully entering completely through the large windows. Patricia highly smoothly added her highly official signature, exactly as a highly official witness, and highly aggressively pushed the highly official documents completely toward the highly specific side, entirely of the massive table, entirely of Fernando. "Your highly anticipated turn," Patricia stated, highly freezing coldly. Fernando intensely looked directly at the highly official papers, exactly as if they were a highly lethal death sentence. "And exactly what entirely about Carla? What exactly am I highly officially supposed to explicitly tell her?" "Exactly that is highly officially your highly pathetic problem. Absolutely not mine," Elena stated, confidently standing completely up. She rapidly picked completely up her expensive coat, highly suddenly incredibly anxious entirely to completely, permanently leave exactly that highly toxic place, exactly those highly toxic people, exactly that highly pathetic life, completely, permanently behind. You highly arrogantly chose Carla exactly when you highly toxically decided that I absolutely was not completely enough. Exactly now, you absolutely have to highly agonizingly live completely with exactly that highly toxic choice. As she confidently walked directly toward the heavy door, Fernando loudly screamed exactly one absolute last, highly desperate time. "Elena, wait! We can miraculously fix exactly this. I will highly ruthlessly leave Carla. We will fiercely raise exactly this beautiful baby completely together. I will absolutely be completely different exactly this highly specific time. I fiercely promise. I fiercely." Elena completely stopped perfectly in the heavy door completely, with her soft hand perfectly on the cold knob. She smoothly turned completely toward him, toward the exact true man who had exactly once absolutely been her entire massive world, and profoundly felt absolutely nothing significantly more than highly pathetic pity. "You will absolutely not highly ruthlessly leave Carla, Fernando. She is absolutely everything you highly desperately wanted entirely in a highly pathetic wife. Beautiful, highly ambitious, highly actively willing entirely to absolutely be your highly pathetic trophy. The absolute only highly massive problem is that she will absolutely never, ever highly miraculously give you exactly what I am highly miraculously giving you right exactly now. And exactly that absolutely must be highly agonizingly killing you." She confidently left completely before he could highly possibly respond. She confidently walked completely out, entirely of the highly sterile conference room, entirely out of the massive building, entirely out of exactly that highly toxic life. Directly behind her, she highly clearly heard highly violently raised voices. Fernando highly violently arguing completely with his highly expensive lawyers. But she absolutely did not actively look completely back. Her highly beautiful, massive future was completely, brilliantly directly ahead. Entirely of her, exactly now. Absolutely not, completely perfectly behind. Elena just signed the divorce papers and left Fernando in shock. Do you think he will actually dump Carla to try and get his baby? Tell us below. Part 4. The New Beginning. In Barcelona outside. The highly bright sun was beautifully setting, flawlessly painting the highly vast sky entirely in highly beautiful shades, entirely of bright orange and highly soft pink. Elena highly gently placed absolutely both soft hands perfectly on her massive belly, highly astutely, physically feeling the highly soft, beautiful movements entirely of her innocent son, or beautiful daughter. This innocent child, this highly massive miracle, had highly generously given her absolutely something significantly more highly precious than the highly toxic love entirely of Fernando. It had highly generously given her absolute purpose, massive strength, and the highly absolute courage entirely to highly bravely choose completely herself, as she confidently walked directly toward her expensive car. Her expensive phone violently vibrated. A highly secure message completely from Patricia, highly officially signed. You are completely, utterly free. Elena beautifully smiled, hot tears beautifully running completely down her pale face. Free. After so incredibly many agonizing years, highly desperately attempting entirely to absolutely be completely enough, entirely for absolutely someone completely else. She was finally, completely, free, entirely, to absolutely be simply, beautifully, herself. And exactly that, she profoundly realized, was the absolute greatest highly massive gift, entirely of absolutely all. The highly modest apartment that Elena highly happily rented was a highly incredibly far massive cry, completely from the highly luxurious penthouse she had highly toxically shared completely with Fernando. It was perfectly on the absolute third floor, entirely of a highly modest building, entirely in the highly quiet, beautiful Grazia neighborhood, entirely in massive Barcelona. Exactly where innocent children happily played entirely in the highly safe courtyard, and highly friendly neighbors intimately knew absolutely each other completely by their highly beautiful first names. The small living room was incredibly small, but beautifully completely filled, completely with highly bright natural light, completely in the highly quiet afternoons. She had beautifully decorated it highly simply, completely with highly soft cream colors and highly beautiful touches, entirely of bright blue and highly soft yellow, highly meticulously preparing a highly cozy nursery corner entirely for the beautiful baby, who would miraculously arrive entirely in absolutely just exactly 2 short months. Elena had highly tragically thought she would profoundly feel completely alone, entirely in exactly this highly brand new life. But highly surprisingly instead, she profoundly felt completely, utterly liberated. Her highly peaceful days had beautifully settled completely into a highly peaceful rhythm. Highly relaxing morning walks, completely through the highly beautiful nearby Park Güell. Highly calming prenatal yoga classes. Highly enthusiastically reading highly informative books entirely about pure motherhood. She had highly enthusiastically actively begun entirely to brutally work, completely remotely, exactly as a highly talented freelance graphic designer. Absolutely something she had completely, violently abandoned, exactly when Fernando highly toxically insisted that his highly elite wife absolutely did not desperately need to highly pathetically work. Now, highly creatively creating completely anew, beautifully filled her, completely with a highly profound sense entirely of absolute purpose, that she had completely forgotten, highly miraculously existed. It was completely during exactly one entirely of her highly routine prenatal checkups that absolutely everything completely violently changed completely anew. The highly elite clinic she had highly carefully chosen was incredibly small and highly welcoming. The highly friendly receptionist exactly now intimately knew her completely by her beautiful first name. "Mrs. Velasco!" the elite nurse loudly called. Exactly, although Elena had incredibly quietly, politely requested that they highly aggressively begin actively calling her Mrs. Cortez, her highly beautiful maiden name. "Dr. Torres will highly happily, vividly see you right exactly now." Elena had absolutely been highly regularly actively seeing Dr. Miguel Torres entirely for the absolute last, highly agonizing month. She smoothly picked completely up her expensive purse and confidently followed the elite nurse completely down the highly quiet hallway. The heavy door entirely of highly sterile examination room 4 was completely wide open, and securely inside, Dr. Miguel Torres was highly meticulously reviewing highly complex charts completely on his advanced tablet. He slowly looked completely up exactly when she confidently entered, and his handsome face, brilliantly lit, completely up, completely, with a highly warm, beautiful smile. "Good, highly beautiful afternoon, Elena. Exactly how are you and the beautiful baby actively doing exactly today?" Miguel Torres absolutely was not exactly what Elena had highly actively expected. Exactly when she absolute first beautifully met him. At exactly 35, highly distinguished years old, he flawlessly possessed a highly calming tranquility that highly immediately put highly nervous people completely at absolute ease. He was incredibly tall, highly broad-shouldered. His highly thick, slightly curly dark hair highly frequently, beautifully fell completely over his pale forehead. His piercing eyes were entirely of a highly deep, warm brown, the highly specific kind that truly, genuinely, actively seemed to completely see you. Absolutely not entirely, just intensely look directly at you. "We are doing completely perfectly fine," Elena stated, comfortably settling completely onto the sterile examination table. "The innocent baby has absolutely been incredibly highly active completely lately. I highly genuinely think he is highly aggressively actively training entirely for the massive Olympics." Miguel laughed loudly, the highly pure sound incredibly genuine and highly warm. "Exactly that is officially a highly excellent massive sign. Highly active babies are incredibly healthy babies. Generously, let me highly carefully listen and vividly see exactly what exactly this highly energetic little athlete is highly actively doing." While he highly meticulously performed the highly complex examination, Miguel happily talked completely to her entirely about absolutely everything and absolutely nothing. He highly politely asked her entirely about her highly busy week, if she had absolutely been peacefully sleeping incredibly well, if she highly desperately needed absolutely anything highly massive, completely unlike the highly arrogant elite doctors entirely of Fernando, who had highly toxically treated her exactly like a highly pathetic, broken machine completely during her highly agonizing fertility problems. Miguel highly respectfully treated her exactly like a highly complete, perfect person. He highly enthusiastically celebrated absolutely every single highly massive milestone. Highly effectively reassured absolutely every single highly terrifying worry. And absolutely never, ever highly maliciously made her profoundly feel completely inadequate. Absolutely everything visually looks completely, utterly perfect," he stated completely after highly efficiently finishing the highly thorough checkup. "Your highly critical blood pressure is completely fine. The highly strong heartbeat entirely of the innocent baby is incredibly strong. You are highly successfully doing an absolutely excellent, massive job, highly meticulously taking absolute care entirely of completely yourself, and exactly this beautiful little one." Elena physically felt exactly how hot tears violently stung her piercing eyes. She had absolutely been so incredibly, blindly terrified completely during the absolute first, highly agonizing months entirely of her beautiful pregnancy. Completely, utterly terrified that absolutely something highly catastrophic would violently go completely wrong. That she would somehow highly tragically fail entirely in exactly this, completely too. The highly constant warm encouragement entirely of Miguel had absolutely been a highly massive, absolute lifeline. "Thank you so incredibly much," she stated incredibly quietly, "for absolutely everything. You have highly successfully made exactly this absolute entire, highly terrifying experience significantly, infinitely less highly terrifying." Miguel highly gently pulled a highly small stool significantly closer and sat heavily down. His handsome expression incredibly serious, but highly kind. "Elena, can I highly politely ask you absolutely something highly personal? You absolutely do not desperately need to actively answer exactly if you absolutely do not fiercely want to." She nodded fiercely. "The highly official name entirely on your highly secure file highly explicitly says Velasco, but you highly politely requested US entirely to actively call you Cortez, and I have highly astutely noticed that you absolutely always confidently come, completely alone, directly to the highly important appointments. Is absolutely everything perfectly fine? Are you completely, perfectly safe?" The highly genuine concern entirely in his deep voice violently touched absolutely something highly profound, completely deep entirely in the fragile heart entirely of Elena. She absolutely had not highly openly explicitly told absolutely anyone entirely about Fernando, entirely about the highly brutal divorce, entirely about absolutely any entirely of exactly that, but absolutely something highly massive entirely in Miguel actively made her fiercely want, entirely to absolutely be completely honest. "I am completely, perfectly safe," she highly securely assured him. "I literally just highly officially completely divorced. The biological father entirely of the innocent baby and I are absolutely no longer completely together. It absolutely was not a highly good, safe situation, and I highly desperately needed to violently leave. Cortez is officially my highly beautiful maiden name. I am highly proudly actively reclaiming it." Miguel incredibly slowly nodded fiercely, highly deeply processing the highly massive information. "I am incredibly, profoundly sorry that you highly agonizingly had to actively go completely through exactly that. But I highly deeply admire your highly absolute strength. It highly aggressively takes highly massive courage entirely to highly bravely start completely anew, highly especially exactly when you are highly actively about to miraculously become a loving mother." They happily talked entirely for a highly few short minutes, significantly more. And exactly when Elena confidently left the highly elite clinic exactly that highly specific day, she profoundly felt highly miraculously, significantly lighter. A highly unexpected, beautiful gesture. That exact night, exactly while she highly lovingly prepared a highly delicious dinner entirely in her highly small, cozy kitchen. She highly surprisingly successfully found completely herself, highly deeply thinking entirely about the highly kind, piercing eyes entirely of Miguel, his highly soft, deep voice, the highly protective way he had highly politely asked exactly if she was completely safe. It had absolutely been so incredibly, highly long completely, since absolutely anyone had highly genuinely cared entirely about her highly absolute well-being. Elena just met Dr. Miguel and felt a spark. Do you think she is ready to date again while pregnant and dealing with her ex? Tell us below. Part 5. The threat returns. The highly agonizing following weeks beautifully brought a highly unexpected, massive complication. Fernando had highly aggressively, actively begun entirely to urgently call completely again, highly frantically leaving highly toxic voice messages that wildly oscillated completely between highly pathetically apologetic and highly aggressively demanding. He highly expensively sent highly massive flowers directly to her highly modest apartment. Highly expensive, massive arrangements that she highly immediately, highly generously gave completely away, directly to her highly sweet elderly neighbor. He confidently showed completely up perfectly at her highly secure building exactly twice. But she highly fiercely refused entirely to highly generously let him confidently come completely up, actively speaking completely to him, absolutely, only completely, through the highly secure intercom. Highly, strictly, explicitly, telling him to highly officially communicate absolutely only completely through their highly elite lawyers. The highly explosive situation completely, violently escalated exactly when Carla violently became highly actively involved. Elena was confidently leaving a highly quiet coffee shop exactly one highly sunny afternoon, exactly when she successfully found completely herself face-to-face completely with the highly arrogant fiancé entirely of Fernando. Carla was absolutely everything the highly sleazy tabloids highly accurately described. Incredibly tall, highly stunning blonde, highly impeccably dressed entirely in highly expensive designer clothes that loudly screamed massive money. Her piercing blue eyes were incredibly cold, exactly like solid ice. "So, you are officially the highly pathetic ex-wife," Carla stated, her toxic voice heavily dripping completely with absolute disdain. The highly pathetic one who is highly desperately actively attempting to highly maliciously trap Fernando, completely with a highly convenient fake pregnancy. Elena physically felt the highly toxic anger violently rise completely in her fragile chest, but flawlessly maintained her beautiful voice incredibly calm. "I am absolutely not highly desperately attempting to highly maliciously trap absolutely anyone. Fernando and I are officially completely divorced. Exactly what he highly actively does completely with his highly pathetic life, exactly now absolutely does not highly strictly concern me." Carla aggressively stepped significantly closer, highly violently invading the highly personal safe space entirely of Elena. "Do you genuinely, arrogantly, think that highly actively having his biological baby miraculously makes you incredibly special? Do you arrogantly think he will violently run completely back directly to you? Fernando fiercely loves me. We are highly officially getting completely married exactly next highly anticipated month, and we are actively going to highly happily successfully possess the highly perfect, beautiful life completely together. You and your highly pathetic little mistake are absolutely not actively going to completely, violently ruin exactly that. Elena could highly easily have explicitly said highly many massive things. She could highly easily have highly casually mentioned that Carla had absolutely been the highly toxic mistress, entirely of Fernando, entirely. While he was absolutely still highly legally married. She could highly easily have highly sharply pointed completely out that Fernando had highly toxically explicitly told her that Carla highly aggressively refused entirely to miraculously have innocent children. Instead, she simply beautifully smiled. "I highly genuinely hope that you are absolutely both incredibly highly happy, completely together," she stated incredibly sincerely. "Now, exactly, if you will highly politely excuse me, I officially possess a highly important medical appointment." She confidently walked completely away, ruthlessly leaving Carla highly pathetically sputtering completely in absolute pure rage completely behind her. The highly toxic encounter completely left Elena completely, violently shaken. And exactly when she safely arrived completely at the highly elite clinic, entirely for her highly scheduled checkup, Miguel highly immediately, highly astutely noticed that absolutely something was highly, catastrophically wrong. "What exactly violently happened?" he highly urgently asked, gently guiding her entirely to safely sit completely down, entirely in his highly private office. Entirely. Instead, entirely in the highly sterile examination room. Elena highly emotionally explicitly told him absolutely everything entirely about Fernando. Entirely about his highly absolute cruelty, completely during their highly toxic marriage. Entirely about the highly brutal divorce. Entirely about the highly explosive confrontation completely with Carla. The heavy words violently gushed completely out, entirely, of her. Exactly like highly rapid water completely from a violently broken dam. Miguel intensely listened completely to absolutely every single heavy word completely without a single interruption. When she finally completely finished, he safely remained completely silent entirely for a highly long, profound moment. Then he explicitly said absolutely something that completely, violently surprised her. "Elena, I profoundly know exactly this is highly likely completely inappropriate, and you can highly freely explicitly say, absolutely no. Absolutely, of course. But would you highly absolutely love to happily have massive dinner completely with me, absolutely sometime? Absolutely not exactly as your elite doctor, but exactly as absolutely someone who would highly genuinely absolutely love to successfully get to profoundly know you significantly. Better completely outside entirely of exactly this highly sterile office." The fragile heart entirely of Elena violently skipped a highly massive beat. She had absolutely not highly actively thought entirely about highly romantic dates. She had absolutely not highly actively imagined that absolutely anyone would fiercely want to actively be completely with a heavily pregnant woman. Highly recently, completely divorced. And completely with so incredibly much highly massive baggage, but intensely looking directly at Miguel. At the highly honest, pure hope entirely in his piercing eyes. She highly surprisingly successfully found completely herself, explicitly saying, yes. Elena agreed to go on a date with Dr. Miguel. Do you think it's a good idea, or too soon after her divorce? Tell us below. A new flame. Their absolute first highly romantic date was entirely in a highly small, incredibly cozy Italian restaurant, flawlessly hidden entirely in a highly quiet, beautiful street. Miguel highly politely picked her completely up, highly chivalrously, opening the heavy car door completely for her, and highly meticulously ensuring that she was perfectly comfortable. During the highly delicious pasta dishes and expensive glasses entirely of sparkling water, they happily talked entirely about absolutely everything. Miguel highly openly told her entirely about his highly demanding work, entirely about exactly why he highly passionately became an elite doctor, entirely about exactly how he highly tragically lost his loving mother completely to severe cancer, exactly when he was absolutely still, entirely in highly demanding medical school, and exactly how that had completely, flawlessly shaped his highly compassionate approach directly to highly advanced medicine. I profoundly realized that highly miraculous healing absolutely isn't entirely just completely about highly actively treating highly physical symptoms, he stated, gently twirling the delicious pasta completely on his expensive fork. It is completely entirely about highly respectfully treating the highly complete, perfect person. Beautiful mind, fragile body, pure spirit. Exactly. That is exactly why I fiercely love elite obstetrics. I highly miraculously get to absolutely be a highly beautiful part, entirely of exactly one. Entirely of the absolute most highly important, magical moments entirely, in the beautiful lives entirely of highly normal people. Elena highly openly told him entirely about her highly pure passion, entirely for beautiful art and highly creative design. Exactly how she had completely, violently abandoned it, exactly when Fernando highly toxically insisted that it absolutely was not highly appropriate, entirely for a highly elite wife, entirely of his highly massive status. I absolutely used to beautifully paint, she honestly admitted. I absolutely have not highly actively touched a highly simple paintbrush entirely in exactly 5 agonizing years. Why exactly not? Miguel asked incredibly simply. Because Fernando highly toxically explicitly said it was an absolute, highly pathetic waste entirely of massive time. That I absolutely should highly actively focus completely entirely on actively being a highly proper, elite wife. Highly elegantly attending the absolute right exclusive events. Highly actively meeting the absolute right elite people. Miguel confidently reached completely across the small table and gently took her soft hand. His highly gentle touch was incredibly warm and highly soft. Elena, I honestly do not completely know absolutely everything that you highly agonizingly went completely through entirely in your highly toxic marriage. But I profoundly know exactly this. You fiercely deserve to highly actively do the highly beautiful things that highly successfully make you incredibly happy. Beautifully paint, miraculously create, happily live the beautiful life that you fiercely want. Absolutely not the highly fake life that absolutely someone completely else highly arrogantly decided you absolutely should highly pathetically have. Hot tears beautifully slid completely down the pale cheeks entirely of Elena. Absolutely no one had absolutely ever highly explicitly said absolutely anything exactly like exactly that, completely to her, completely before. Fernando had absolutely always highly maliciously made her profoundly feel that her beautiful dreams were highly pathetically silly, incredibly childish, completely, utterly unimportant. But Miguel confidently spoke exactly as if her highly pure happiness truly, genuinely mattered. They happily had significantly more highly romantic dates. Miguel highly happily took her directly to a highly specialized art supply store and highly aggressively insisted completely on highly expensively buying her a highly complete, massive set entirely of expensive paints and blank canvases. They highly happily visited the highly beautiful botanical garden, peacefully walking incredibly slowly, completely through the massive greenhouse entirely, while Elena beautifully sketched the exotic flowers. They happily had highly romantic picnics entirely in the massive park. Miguel absolutely always highly thoughtfully brought highly soft cushions, entirely so exactly that she could highly comfortably sit. The highly beautiful romance completely between them miraculously grew entirely in the absolute, most highly natural, beautiful way. Miguel absolutely never, ever highly aggressively pressured. Absolutely never, ever highly toxically demanded. He highly generously let Elena flawlessly set the highly comfortable pace, highly respectfully respecting her highly massive need entirely to miraculously heal completely from her highly toxic past. Completely, before, highly. Completely opening her fragile heart, completely, to the highly bright future. But the highly massive attraction was completely, undeniably, irrefutable. The highly beautiful way his strong hand gently lingered perfectly on her highly delicate lower back, exactly when he highly politely helped her safely exit the expensive car. The highly beautiful way her heavy pulse violently accelerated, exactly when he beautifully smiled radiantly, completely at her. The highly electric electricity that violently jumped exactly when their soft fingers beautifully intertwined. One highly quiet night, completely after a highly romantic sunset walk perfectly by the massive river. Miguel safely brought her completely home and safely walked her completely to the heavy door entirely of her highly secure apartment. The heavy air perfectly between them was heavily charged, completely, with absolutely something significantly more highly profound than highly simple friendship. Elena smoothly turned completely around entirely to highly politely thank him entirely for the highly beautiful evening. But the heavy words completely, violently died entirely on her soft lips, exactly when she vividly saw the highly intense way he intensely looked directly at her. "Elena," he stated incredibly softly, "can I highly passionately kiss you?" She nodded fiercely, completely, utterly incapable entirely of successfully speaking. Miguel highly, gently took her beautiful face, incredibly softly, completely, between his strong hands, and highly passionately kissed her completely with a highly pure tenderness that actively made her profoundly feel incredibly weak. It absolutely was not completely anything exactly like highly passionately kissing Fernando, which had absolutely always physically felt exactly like a highly fake, toxic performance. Exactly this highly passionate kiss was incredibly real, highly honest, completely full, entirely, of highly genuine, pure emotion. When they finally completely separated, absolutely both were completely breathless. I have highly desperately wanted to highly actively do exactly that entirely for agonizing weeks, Miguel honestly admitted, gently resting his warm forehead completely against hers. Me completely too, Elena whispered incredibly softly. The battle for Oliver, their highly beautiful relationship beautifully deepened completely after exactly that highly magical night. Miguel miraculously became a highly constant, beautiful presence entirely in her massive life, but absolutely never, ever highly toxically intrusive. He highly respectfully respected her highly secure space, her absolute independence, Her highly massive need entirely to fiercely prove completely to her absolute own self that she could highly successfully actively do exactly this, completely, alone. But he was absolutely always perfectly right, perfectly there, exactly when she highly desperately needed him. Completely ready, completely with highly massive support, pure comfort, or simply his highly quiet, calming presence. He absolutely also fiercely fell completely in pure love, completely with her highly innocent, unborn baby. He highly lovingly talked directly to her massive belly completely during their highly private, beautiful moments, highly happily telling highly entertaining stories completely to the innocent baby, highly bravely making highly beautiful promises entirely about the highly massive adventures they would highly happily possess completely together. But their highly pure happiness was completely, violently interrupted, completely by the absolute last, highly toxic move entirely of Fernando. Exactly 2 agonizing weeks completely before her highly anticipated due date, Elena highly shockingly received a highly official, massive legal notification. Fernando was highly aggressively legally requesting highly joint legal custody and highly aggressively demanding that the innocent baby highly officially carry the highly arrogant surname Velasco. He highly maliciously alleged that the highly brand new romantic relationship entirely of Elena flawlessly proved that she absolutely was not highly completely focused entirely on the absolute well-being entirely of the innocent baby, and that she was highly maliciously actively attempting entirely to highly toxically replace him completely with absolutely another man. Elena was completely, utterly devastated. She had highly desperately tried so incredibly, highly hard, entirely, to flawlessly maintain highly complex things, highly civilized, to highly generously ensure that Fernando could highly successfully be a highly massive part entirely of the beautiful life entirely of his biological son. But he absolutely could not highly simply actively be a true father. He highly toxically had to aggressively control, violently dominate, highly arrogantly win. Miguel miraculously found her violently crying entirely on her cheap sofa. The highly complex legal papers carelessly scattered completely all around her. He sat heavily perfectly next, completely to her, lovingly drawing her completely into his strong arms. "We will fiercely fight completely against exactly this," he stated incredibly firmly. "You are absolutely already an incredibly amazing loving mother. Absolutely no stern judge will violently take exactly this innocent baby completely away, completely from you." "But exactly what if they highly catastrophically do?" Elena violently sobbed. "What exactly if Fernando highly maliciously uses his massive money and highly elite influence entirely to violently take my biological son? Exactly that will absolutely never, ever highly possibly happen," Miguel fiercely promised. "And Elena, there is absolutely something highly massive that I highly desperately need to explicitly say. Absolutely something entirely on which I have absolutely been highly deeply thinking, entirely for highly, quite absolutely some massive time." He leaned incredibly slightly, completely back, entirely, so exactly that he could intensely look completely directly, entirely into her piercing eyes. "I fiercely love you. I fiercely love you, and I fiercely love exactly this innocent baby. I profoundly know that we absolutely haven't, absolutely been completely together entirely for a highly incredibly long, massive time, completely according, completely to highly traditional, boring standards. But absolutely some highly massive things you absolutely, just highly instinctively profoundly know are completely, 100% right. When you are completely ready, exactly when you profoundly feel the highly exact, same massive way, I highly desperately want to miraculously build a highly beautiful life completely with you. I highly desperately want to absolutely be perfectly there, entirely for absolutely every single highly exhausting midnight feeding, every single highly precious first onward date, every single highly painful scraped knee. I highly desperately want to actively be the true father that exactly this innocent child fiercely deserves, and the highly loyal partner that you fiercely deserve. Would you highly happily marry me? The hot tears entirely of Elena, completely, beautifully changed completely from massive sadness directly to pure, unadulterated joy. I fiercely love you completely too, she whispered incredibly softly. I absolutely did not highly genuinely think I could highly possibly absolutely ever highly successfully love completely again. Completely after Fernando. But you highly beautifully showed me exactly what highly true, pure love actually visually looks exactly like. They passionately embraced exactly as the bright sun beautifully set, completely outside her large window. Exactly two beautiful people who had miraculously found absolutely each other, exactly, highly precisely, entirely, in the absolute right, perfect massive moment, and entirely in exactly that highly passionate embrace. Elena profoundly felt absolutely something she absolutely hadn't miraculously felt entirely in agonizing years. Absolute hope entirely for the highly beautiful future. Dr. Miguel just proposed to Elena while she is fighting her toxic ex in court. Do you think she should accept? Tell us below. The true father. Exactly 2 agonizing weeks, significantly later. Elena violently went completely into highly active labor, entirely in the absolute middle, entirely of a highly terrifying, violent thunderstorm. Miguel had absolutely been highly protectively safely staying completely with her, entirely for the absolute last, highly tense few days. Highly uncomfortably, peacefully sleeping entirely on her cheap sofa, entirely. Despite her highly polite protests that he successfully possessed his absolute own, massive house, completely to safely go directly to. When her highly excruciating contractions aggressively began at exactly 2 a.m., he was completely there, highly instantly. Incredibly calm, and highly fiercely focused, beautifully guiding her completely through highly complex breathing exercises entirely, while he highly rapidly packed her highly essential hospital bag. The highly frantic trip directly to the massive hospital was completely surreal. The freezing rain violently beat completely against the heavy windshield, exactly as highly blinding lightning violently split the highly dark sky. But completely inside the expensive car, Miguel fiercely held her soft hand and beautifully guided her completely through absolutely every single highly painful contraction. His deep voice was incredibly steady and highly reassuring. You are highly flawlessly doing completely wonderfully, he highly constantly actively kept explicitly saying. Simply highly actively breathe. I am perfectly right, perfectly here, completely with you. The highly agonizing delivery was incredibly long and highly difficult. Elena violently labored entirely for exactly 14 agonizing hours, completely exhausted and highly terrified. But Miguel absolutely never, ever actively left her fragile side. He highly gently wiped her sweaty forehead completely with highly cool cloths, fiercely held her soft hand completely during the highly excruciating contractions, highly lovingly whispered, highly encouraging heavy words, exactly when she profoundly felt, highly desperately, like completely giving completely up. The highly exhausted nurses highly constantly actively kept highly politely commenting entirely on exactly how incredibly wonderful he was, exactly as a highly devoted husband. A highly beautiful comment that absolutely neither Elena nor Miguel highly actively corrected. Finally, at exactly 4:37 p.m., Oliver Jaime Cortez confidently arrived completely into the massive world. He officially weighed exactly 3.2 massive kilograms. He successfully possessed a highly full, beautiful head, entirely of highly dark hair, and highly powerful lungs that loudly announced his highly anticipated arrival completely to the absolute entire massive maternity ward. When the elite nurse highly gently placed him perfectly on the sweaty chest entirely of Elena, she intensely looked directly at her biological son and profoundly felt a highly pure love so incredibly, completely overwhelming that it miraculously, almost violently stopped her fragile heart. "Hello, Oliver," she whispered incredibly softly, hot tears beautifully running completely down her pale face. "I am officially your loving mama. I have absolutely been highly impatiently waiting so incredibly, highly long entirely, to successfully meet you." Miguel confidently stood perfectly by the sterile bed, his absolute own piercing eyes incredibly wet, completely from hot tears. "He is completely perfect, Elena. Absolutely, utterly perfect." The highly exhausting following days were an absolute, highly blurry blur, entirely of highly strict feeding schedules, highly messy diaper changes, and highly exhausting sleepless nights. Miguel peacefully stayed entirely in the massive hospital, highly uncomfortably peacefully sleeping entirely in the highly uncomfortable, cheap chair, perfectly next, completely to her sterile bed. Highly stubbornly, refusing entirely to confidently leave. He highly happily learned exactly how to flawlessly change highly dirty diapers, exactly how to flawlessly swaddle Oliver completely into the highly perfect, secure burrito wrap, exactly how to highly astutely recognize the highly different, complex types entirely of highly loud crying. When the elite nurses highly meticulously taught Elena exactly how to highly successfully breastfeed. Miguel politely stepped completely outside entirely to highly respectfully give her absolute privacy. But he was absolutely, always perfectly right, perfectly outside the heavy door, exactly if she highly desperately needed absolutely anything. Fernando confidently appeared entirely on the absolute second highly tense day. Elena was highly peacefully breastfeeding Oliver exactly when the heavy door smoothly opened and her highly toxic ex-husband confidently entered heavily carrying a highly massive, expensive teddy bear and a highly extravagant bouquet entirely of expensive roses. He completely, violently, stopped highly dead, entirely in his highly arrogant tracks, exactly when he vividly saw Miguel peacefully sitting entirely in the highly uncomfortable chair, perfectly next, completely to the sterile bed, visually looking completely, utterly, perfectly, at highly comfortable home. "What exactly the hell is he actively doing exactly here?" Fernando violently demanded, his deep voice incredibly cutting. "Miguel is perfectly right, perfectly here, entirely because I highly fiercely want him entirely to absolutely be perfectly here. Elena stated incredibly calmly, highly gently adjusting the highly soft blanket entirely of Oliver. If you fiercely want to successfully meet your biological son, you highly absolutely can. But you absolutely will not confidently enter exactly this highly secure room completely with exactly that highly toxic attitude. The sharp jaw entirely of Fernando violently tensed, but he heavily put the expensive bear and the expensive flowers completely down. He slowly approached directly to the sterile bed, incredibly slowly. His piercing eyes completely, violently fixed completely on the highly tiny bundle, entirely in the soft arms, entirely of Elena. When he successfully got exactly close enough entirely to vividly see the highly beautiful face entirely of Oliver, absolutely something completely, violently cracked entirely in his highly arrogant expression. He visually looks exactly like you, Fernando stated incredibly quietly. Miraculously, almost completely, with absolute reverence. He successfully possesses your highly specific nose. Would you highly possibly absolutely love to gently hold him? Elena highly surprisingly offered. Completely surprising, absolutely, even completely herself, completely with the highly massive generosity. Despite absolutely everything. Exactly this was absolutely still the true biological father entirely of Oliver. Fernando highly gently took his biological son, completely with violently trembling massive hands, highly carefully holding him exactly as if he could highly easily completely break. For highly several agonizing minutes, absolutely no one actively spoke. Fernando intensely looked directly at Oliver completely, with a highly pure expression that Elena had absolutely never, ever, vividly seen completely before. Absolute, pure, completely unreserved love. She profoundly felt highly pathetic pity entirely for exactly what highly possibly could have absolutely been exactly if he had absolutely been highly successfully capable entirely of highly, generously showing her exactly that highly pure love completely to her. I am incredibly, profoundly sorry, Fernando highly suddenly stated completely with a highly broken emotional voice. I am so incredibly, highly sorry, Elena, for absolutely everything that I highly toxically said. Absolutely everything that I violently did. You were completely 100% right. I was incredibly cruel and highly selfish, and you absolutely did not fiercely deserve absolutely any entirely of exactly that. Elena nodded fiercely, highly peacefully accepting the highly pathetic apology, but absolutely not highly completely absolving him. We absolutely cannot miraculously change the highly toxic past, Fernando. But we can highly successfully do the absolute best, highly massive thing entirely for Oliver. He fiercely deserves to explicitly know his true father. Are you actively going to highly happily marry him? Fernando sharply asked, intensely looking directly at Miguel. Exactly that is absolutely no longer absolutely any entirely of your highly toxic business. Miguel highly smoothly intervened entirely in a highly polite, but incredibly firm, massive manner. Exactly what truly matters is that Oliver will absolutely be beautifully raised, entirely in a highly warm home, completely full, entirely of pure love and absolute respect. Fernando intensely looked completely between the exactly two entirely of them, and entirely for the absolute first time actively seemed to highly completely accept his highly absolute, complete defeat. You are 100% absolutely right. He gently gave Oliver completely back directly to Elena. I will highly officially withdraw the highly aggressive custody lawsuit, We can highly successfully elaborate a highly reasonable, fair visitation schedule. I absolutely only highly desperately want to actively be a highly massive part entirely of his beautiful life. Exactly that is absolutely all I absolutely ever fiercely wanted, he stated. The absolute best possible ending. After Fernando confidently left, Elena profoundly felt significantly, infinitely lighter. Miguel safely returned directly to the highly uncomfortable chair and gently took her soft hand. You were completely, utterly amazing, he stated. The highly beautiful way you highly gracefully handled exactly that. Highly generously giving him the highly fragile chance entirely to gently hold Oliver, absolutely even completely, after absolutely everything. Exactly that highly aggressively requires highly true, absolute strength. He is officially the biological father entirely of Oliver, Elena stated. Oliver simply highly fiercely deserves entirely to highly successfully possess a highly beautiful relationship completely with him. If Fernando can highly successfully be the true father, he highly desperately needs entirely to absolutely. Exactly 2 highly agonizing months seamlessly passed entirely in a highly beautiful, safe haven. Elena flawlessly adapted completely to beautiful motherhood, completely with absolutely all its highly complex challenges and highly massive rewards. Oliver was a highly good, beautiful baby, incredibly alert and highly curious, completely with a highly radiant smile that could highly miraculously illuminate an absolute entire massive room. Miguel was completely, perfectly there, entirely, for absolutely everything. The highly exhausting 2 a.m. feedings exactly when Elena was way too incredibly completely exhausted entirely to actively move. The highly frequent appointments completely with the elite pediatrician. The absolute first, highly pure laugh. The absolute first, highly magical time that Oliver highly strongly grabbed his massive finger and fiercely held completely on incredibly tight. Fernando highly faithfully kept his heavy word, entirely about highly officially withdrawing the highly aggressive custody lawsuit. And they highly successfully established a highly fair visitation schedule that highly flawlessly worked entirely for absolutely everyone. Every single exactly 2 highly anticipated weekends. Fernando confidently came directly to the highly modest apartment entirely of Elena entirely to happily spend highly quality time completely with Oliver. He absolutely never, ever highly arrogantly brought Carla. And he absolutely never, ever safely stayed highly toxically, significantly longer than exactly what was highly officially agreed completely upon. Slowly and highly tentatively, they beautifully developed a highly cordial, respectful co-parenting relationship. It was completely during exactly one, entirely of exactly these highly scheduled visits, that Fernando finally highly actively asked the highly intrusive question that had absolutely been violently hanging completely in the heavy air, entirely for agonizing months. Are you completely utterly happy, Elena? She slowly looked completely up, completely from exactly where she was, as highly meticulously preparing the highly warm bottle entirely of Oliver, and beautifully smiled. Yes, Fernando, I highly genuinely, truly am. He nodded fiercely, highly gently rocking Oliver incredibly softly, entirely in his strong arms. Good. Exactly that is incredibly good. He violently hesitated, and then aggressively continued. I completely, violently broke completely up, completely with Carla. The absolute last agonizing month. She highly toxically gave me a highly strict ultimatum. Her or the highly scheduled visits completely with Oliver. She highly toxically explicitly said she had absolutely not highly happily signed completely up, entirely, to absolutely be a highly pathetic stepmother, entirely to the highly annoying baby, entirely, of absolutely someone completely else. He laughed highly bitterly. It is incredibly funny exactly how you highly horrifyingly discover exactly who highly toxic people truly are, exactly when highly massive things highly aggressively get incredibly difficult. I am incredibly sorry, Elena stated, and she highly genuinely, truly meant it. Do absolutely not be highly pathetically sorry. You highly desperately attempted to explicitly tell me exactly what she was truly exactly like. But I was way too incredibly highly arrogant entirely to intensely listen. Exactly this little guy. He intensely looked directly at Oliver. Beautifully taught me exactly what truly, genuinely matters. Absolutely not the massive money, or the highly elite status, or highly arrogantly having the highly perfect fake trophy wife. Absolutely only pure love. Highly simple and completely uncomplicated pure love. After Fernando confidently left exactly that highly specific day, Miguel confidently came completely over entirely for a highly delicious dinner. He had miraculously become an absolute, highly permanent fixture entirely in their beautiful lives. And Elena literally could not, highly possibly actively imagine her highly beautiful days completely without him. While she highly lovingly cooked, he happily played completely with Oliver entirely on a highly soft blanket, perfectly on the hard floor entirely of the small living room, actively making highly silly, funny faces that actively made the beautiful baby loudly laugh completely uncontrollably, vividly seeing them completely together. Elena profoundly felt her fragile heart completely, violently swell. Exactly. This was officially her highly perfect family. Absolutely not the highly perfect one she had highly meticulously planned. Absolutely not the highly perfect one she had highly pathetically expected. But the highly perfect exactly one that had absolutely been miraculously given completely to her. And it was completely, utterly perfect that exact night. Completely after Oliver peacefully fell deeply asleep entirely in his expensive crib. Miguel and Elena sat peacefully completely together entirely on the cheap sofa. He had absolutely been incredibly quiet, completely during the highly delicious dinner. Highly thoughtful entirely in a highly specific way that actively made her profoundly feel incredibly curious. I officially possess absolutely something highly massive entirely for you, he finally stated, smoothly pulling a highly small, expensive velvet box completely out entirely of his deep pocket. Elena violently held her heavy breath. Miguel smoothly opened the highly expensive box entirely to flawlessly reveal a highly stunning diamond ring. Incredibly simple, highly elegant. I profoundly know that we absolutely haven't absolutely been completely together entirely for a highly incredibly long, massive time, completely according completely to highly traditional, boring standards, he stated. But I have absolutely never, ever been significantly, more completely 100% sure entirely of absolutely anything entirely in my entire massive life. Elena, you are officially the absolute most highly strong and completely incredible beautiful woman I have absolutely ever miraculously met. And Oliver, he is officially the biological son entirely of my fragile heart. Even exactly if he absolutely isn't the biological son entirely of my pure blood. I highly desperately want to highly happily spend the absolute rest entirely of my entire life, fiercely loving absolutely both entirely of you, highly fiercely supporting you, actively being your highly loyal partner entirely and absolutely every single highly massive way that genuinely matters. Would you highly happily marry me? Hot tears beautifully ran completely down the pale face entirely of Elena, exactly as she fiercely nodded. Yes, she whispered incredibly softly. Yes, Miguel, I will highly happily marry you. He highly smoothly slipped the highly expensive ring perfectly onto her delicate finger and highly passionately kissed her incredibly deeply, fiercely hugging her incredibly tight. When they finally completely separated, absolutely both were loudly laughing and violently crying, completely at the exact same highly magical time. They happily married exactly 3 agonizing months significantly later, entirely in a highly small, beautiful ceremony, perfectly in the highly beautiful botanical garden, exactly where they had highly romantically shared their absolute first, highly passionate kiss, exactly as a highly beautiful couple. Elena flawlessly wore a highly simple, beautiful ivory designer dress that beautifully flowed completely around her exactly like pure water. Oliver, who was exactly 5 agonizing months old, was flawlessly dressed entirely in a highly adorable tiny suit, and was fiercely held completely by the highly loyal sister entirely of Miguel, completely during the highly romantic ceremony. Miguel highly officially legally adopted Oliver exactly when the highly adorable little boy was exactly 2 young years old. The highly official ceremony entirely in the highly imposing courthouse was incredibly small and highly simple. But exactly when the stern judge highly proudly declared that Miguel Torres was exactly now officially the highly legal true father entirely of Oliver, perfectly, there was absolutely no dry eye entirely in the highly packed room. Fernando had highly graciously accepted the highly official adoption, highly respectfully recognizing that Miguel was officially the true father, whom Oliver loudly called entirely in the absolute middle entirely of the pitch-black night. The exact true father, who highly patiently taught him exactly how to successfully ride a highly fast bicycle. The exact true father who would absolutely be perfectly there entirely for absolutely every single highly important, massive moment. Exactly 3 agonizing years, completely after their highly beautiful wedding, Elena miraculously gave highly magical birth completely to identical twins. A beautiful girl, whom they highly lovingly named Sophia, and a highly handsome boy, whom they highly lovingly named Benjamin. Oliver was completely, utterly enchanted, entirely, to absolutely be a highly protective big brother. And the massive house was beautifully filled completely with the highly chaotic chaos and highly pure joy entirely of exactly 3 highly energetic young children. One highly quiet night, exactly when the identical twins were exactly 6 agonizing months old, and finally peacefully asleep, Elena successfully found completely herself, confidently standing perfectly in the heavy threshold, entirely of the highly colorful room, entirely of Oliver. He was exactly 4 young years old. He visually looked incredibly, highly exactly like Fernando, but completely with her highly gentle, beautiful spirit. Miguel confidently approached completely from directly behind, highly lovingly wrapping his strong arms completely around her fragile waist. "What exactly are you highly, deeply thinking entirely about?" he asked incredibly quietly. "Absolutely, only entirely about exactly how incredibly grateful I absolutely am," she stated, heavily leaning completely against him. "For you, for our beautiful children, for exactly this beautiful life." Perfectly. There was exactly one highly terrifying time, exactly when I highly pathetically thought I would absolutely never, ever, highly successfully be completely happy completely again. And exactly now, I literally cannot highly possibly imagine actively being absolutely anything completely else, completely other than incredibly happy. She smoothly turned entirely in his strong arms, entirely to intensely look directly at him. "You miraculously saved me, Miguel." He incredibly slowly shook his handsome head, beautifully smiling. "No, Elena. You miraculously saved completely yourself. I absolutely only highly successfully had the highly massive privilege entirely of actively being perfectly there, entirely, to highly proudly witness it." They peacefully stayed perfectly there, entirely, in the highly quiet hallway, entirely of their highly warm home. Heavily surrounded completely by the highly undeniable evidence entirely of the beautiful life they had miraculously built completely together. Exactly. This was officially her highly absolute happiness. Absolutely, not the highly fake one she had highly pathetically dreamed entirely of exactly when she was a highly young, naive bride, confidently walking completely down the highly romantic aisle, directly toward Fernando Velasco. It was significantly, infinitely better, because exactly this highly beautiful ending had absolutely been highly aggressively earned, completely through massive anguish and profound healing, completely through absolute courage and massive growth, completely through highly bravely learning that occasionally, the absolute best, highly beautiful love stories miraculously begin. And exactly when you finally highly successfully learn exactly how to fiercely love completely yourself, as the bright sun beautifully set completely over their massive backyard, flawlessly painting the highly vast sky entirely, in highly beautiful shades, entirely of bright gold and soft pink. Elena confidently stood perfectly on her highly quiet porch and beautifully smiled. She had confidently arrived directly at the highly imposing office entirely of exactly that highly elite lawyer, exactly 7 agonizing months heavily pregnant, completely, utterly ready to violently end a highly toxic chapter entirely of her massive life. She had violently shocked her highly toxic ex-husband completely with the absolute truth that he had highly arrogantly refused to vividly see, and entirely in highly bravely doing exactly so, she had completely, violently liberated completely herself, entirely to highly actively write a completely, utterly brand new, highly epic story. A highly epic story, exactly where she absolutely was not a highly pathetic trophy, or a highly toxic disappointment, but a highly powerful woman who profoundly knew her highly absolute massive worth, a highly dedicated mother who fiercely loved completely unconditionally, a highly loyal wife who was completely, utterly cherished, a highly beautiful human being who had highly successfully survived the absolute worst and had miraculously emerged significantly, infinitely stronger, completely on the absolute other, highly beautiful side. And exactly that, Elena highly thoughtfully thought exactly as Miguel confidently approached completely from directly behind and highly lovingly hugged her completely by her fragile waist, was officially the absolute best, highly perfect specific kind, entirely of highly beautiful, happy ending that could highly possibly absolutely ever miraculously exist.